Hello everyone, welcome to another Peaky Boardgamers episode. My name is Ektorakos and today we're gonna see the rules of Praga Caput Regni, another game from Vladimir Suchy for 1 to 4 players. In the game, players take the role of wealthy citizens taking over building projects in the medieval Prague. Now the game uses only 6 actions and a very interesting rondel mechanism, so let's move to the table and see how the game is played. At first, place the massive board in the middle of the table. Create supplies with the windows, the bonus tokens and the eggs next to the board. Next, place the bridge on this space on the board. Then you need the 2 bonus tiles which are double-sided and you may use them any way you like. Then you need the 12 bridge tiles. After you separate them by type and shuffle each stack, you need 3 of the golden tiles which should be placed here and the rest 3 should be placed here. Then place all of the silver tiles at this point here. Place the Hanger Wall tiers and the Cathedral tiers on the board as well. These 6 spaces on the board are meant for production tokens. Some of them have duplicates or duplicate tokens go to the same space. In the bottom part of the board we see many hexagonal spaces. Some of them depict a market of a specific color. These spaces are meant for the plaza tokens here. Randomly place a plaza tile on each one of these plaza hexes. The only limitation is that the color of the market on the board must be the same with the color of the market on the tile. Some spaces depict icons of specific player counts. These spaces are only used if the number of players is depicted on the icon. The situation in a 3-player setup should be like this. I have just left this space empty as it's only meant for 4 players. The leftover tiles are not used and are returned to the box. These here are technology tiles. Separate them by number, shuffle each stack and place each stack face down next to the board. The hexes of the game are split to 3 main categories: upgrades, walls and buildings. Separate all the tiles by era, era 1 or era 2, and by rarity, normal tiles and special tiles depicting an S on them. For the beginning we don't need era 2 tiles, so set them aside for now. After you shuffle all stacks and place them face down next to the board, you will need for each one of the types a special tile that should be placed here and another 3 normal tiles that should be placed here. All of the tiles on the board are placed face up. Again, some of these hexes depict player count icons. If your player count is depicted in one of these hexes, then these hexes receive a random building tile from the top of the stack, which is placed face up again. In a 3-player game, I should place a building in this space here. Turn the rondel so that this icon is pointing to the icon that depicts your player count. I'm setting up for 3 players, so I should turn it here. Then take the 2 white cubes, place one in this slot in the rondel and the other one goes to this track to the space that depicts your player count as well. Finally place this small 5 victory point token in this space here. Then take the 6 action tokens, shuffle them and place them in the rondel starting from this space and moving clockwise. These tokens have an A and a B side. For your first game it is recommended that you use the A side. Each player selects one of the colors and gets a personal board, an action board and the wooden components of this color. Players set both of their dials to 2, indicating that they start the game with 2 gold and 2 stone resources. Then players place one of their wooden cubes to each space that I show you in the graphics. Players place one of their cubes in the starting spaces of the Hanger Walls and the Cathedral tiers. Next, players place their pawns next to the starting space of the King's Road. Finally, players place their scoring marker discs into space 0 of the scoring track and the game is ready to start. In general, the game uses a rondel action mechanism. The rondel holds 6 different action tiles, each one offering an option of 2 different actions to the player. In total, there are 6 different actions that are also depicted on the player's action board. Players select one of the players at random to take the first turn and the rest follow in a clockwise order. On his turn, a player chooses one of the tiles, selects one of the actions and performs it, and when he's done, he turns the rondel once to the right and places his tile at this space here. And then it's the next player's turn in a clockwise manner. Three of these actions are connected to buying corresponding tiles from this market here. The yellow upgrades are placed on top of the player's action board, improving specific actions for the player. The grey walls are placed around the player's action board, and efficient placement will lead to more bonuses. Finally, we have the buildings, which are similar to walls, but they are placed on the board instead. We have also two production actions with which the player increases his resources in gold or stone. Finally, with this action, the player continues the journey of his pawn across the King's Road. The end of this journey will be to build the King's Bridge. Before explaining the individual actions in greater detail, I'd like to say a couple of general rules about action taking. Depending on the action tile's position, there could be an extra cost in gold or bonus victory points. The timing of this payment is immediate, meaning that if the player cannot pay the gold, he may not choose the action tile. Each one of the action tiles will be combined with a bonus in the middle of the rondo. So if I choose this action tile, whichever action I choose from it, then I will also get a bonus of 1 stone. And if I chose this action tile, I could pay a stone to get an egg. Now this bonus timing is more loose, meaning that players can get it at any time during their turn. Meaning that if a player doesn't have the stone to get the egg initially and gets a stone during his turn, he can come back and get the egg. These bonuses give gold and these bonuses give a silver window. Last but not least, we have these S bonuses depicted here. If a player chooses an action tile with this bonus and chooses to perform the tile building action, then the player may buy a special tile from the rightmost column of the market. If however he buys a normal tile, then his bonus will be a victory point. If the player didn't choose the tile building action, then his only option will be to get the victory points as a bonus. Let's start with the two manage mine actions. These are pretty much simple, one is for gold and one is for stones. For each resource type, a player has a rondo depicting how much resources he currently has, and a track depicting how many mines he has. When a player performs one of these actions, let's say for example the gold action, then the player has two options as it's depicted on the action as well. Option 1 is the player gains only one resource but also increases his mines by 1, moving his cube one space to the right. Option 2 is the player produces 1 unit of resource for each mine he has and also gains all the bonuses depicted in the recessions to the left of the player's cube. So if I produced now, I would gain 5 units of gold and a victory point. When a player reaches 6 units of a specific resource for first time, you will see that the dial stumbles on this cube, reminding the player to remove that cube and gain this bonus depicted here. In this case, the bonus is a step in the technology track. I will explain what these two tracks do in a little bit. The same thing happens when a player reaches 9 units of any resource the first time. The player gains a golden window. Now take a look at these two recessions. These are spaces for production tokens. When the player's marker reaches this space, the player will gain an available production token from the board and will place it at this space here. From now on, whenever he produces, he will be gaining 2 victory points and a stone as well. Last but not least, whenever a player reaches the end of a track, then this icon here is an indication that the player may acquire one of the 5 seals on the board. The player may decide to do this immediately or leave the cube in this space and do it during any of his future turns. The player takes the cube from the track and places it to one of the 5 seals that will grant him victory points at the end of the game. Some of the seals require a window cost to be paid at this moment if the player is to place his cube here. Important, there can be only 1 cube on each one of the seals, so it's like whoever comes first. Next action, upgrade an action. When this is performed, players choose one of the available upgrade tiles on the board and place it to the corresponding action space on their action board. And they also move their university track marker 1 space forward if it's era 1 or 2 spaces forward if it's era 2. Now this action is improved, meaning that when the player chooses to upgrade an action in the future, he will also be collecting 1 victory point. It is also allowed to upgrade an already upgraded action by placing another tile on top of the previous one. Now this player will be collecting a stone each time he performs this action. The player may orient the new tile as he wishes, and this is very important as there are many adjacency bonuses. We have corner adjacency bonuses and side adjacency bonuses. Placing a tile that is not adjacent to other tiles will not grant a player any of these bonuses. However, if this player in a future action placed this tile here, then he would gain 1 red bonus token as a bonus. And if he placed a wall tile here with an action we will soon see, then he would gain another 2 red bonus tokens. And finally, placing this wall here, the player would collect both of these side adjacency bonuses. They don't have to be the same. The player would collect a silver window and 2 victory points. When the player finishes with his action, he must replenish the empty space using a tile from the supply from the corresponding stack. Next, we have the construct a wall action. Players choose one of the available grey tiles from the board and place it adjacent to their action board. These tiles, however, have an additional cost depicted in a red banner on the tile. If the player cannot pay this, they cannot choose this tile. After placing the tile, players collect the instant bonuses depicted in the green window as well as any other adjacency bonuses. If the tile depicts an icon of a blue castle, then the player is entitled to make a move with his cube on the hunger walls, but this is something I will explain in a little bit. Finally, players may not place a wall tile on top of another one. Again here, after players finish with the action, they must replenish the empty space with a new tile. The next action is construct a building. These tiles are quite similar to wall tiles, but they are instead placed on yellow hexes on the board. Building tiles also depict a red banner with additional costs, but some spaces also have additional costs and a bonus to be granted. So if, for example, a player wants to place this tile in this hex, he must pay 2 gold, a stone, and he will gain 2 victory points for this placement. After placement, player gains the bonuses depicted in the green window of the tile, as well as applicable adjacency bonuses, which this time is blue bonus tokens. All building hexes are adjacent to one plaza tile. Some buildings have a slot for a player's cube, and some others don't have that slot. When a player places a building with no cube slot, he immediately gains 1 victory point for each building around the same plaza, including his own, so in this case the player will gain 3 victory points. But if a player places a building with a slot, then instead of this bonus, he places one of his cubes in the middle and gains a claim on this plaza. After the last hex around the plaza becomes occupied, then all players with a claim on the plaza decide and gain one of the 2 bonuses depicted on the plaza tile. And the player that has the most claims, here the green player, gains both bonuses depicted. If there is a tie in cubes, players calculate the tile and placement costs for these tiles, and the player who paid the most gains the 2 bonuses. If there is still a tie, then all tied players receive all bonuses. After the plaza is scored, all players retrieve their cubes from their building tiles. Now, last but not least, if the tile placed depicts a red cathedral icon, then the player gains a move for his cube in the cathedral tier. After the player is done placing his building, he must replenish the empty space on the board. The last action is construct the King's Road. With this action, the player moves his pawn to the next pawn space in the King's Road and collects both of the bonuses depicted next to that space. One of the 2 bonus options always requires payment of an egg. To move to the 4th space of the King's Road, the player must be able to pay an egg, otherwise he cannot choose to perform the action at all. If he has the egg, however, he moves his pawn to the next space and picks the top 3 tiles from this stack, chooses one of these and returns the rest face down in the bottom of the pile. These tiles depict bonuses that the player collects immediately. After that, the player places this tile in one of the empty spaces on the bridge and collects the bonuses depicted in the spaces he will cover as well. So if I place my tile here, I will collect 3 blue bonus tokens and an egg. Moving to the fifth and last space of the King's Road also requires the player to pay an egg. After the player pays, he chooses one of the available yellow tokens and returns the rest back to the space. The yellow tiles will affect the player's final scoring. The player places the tile again in one empty space on the bridge, collecting the bonuses from the spaces he will cover. Finally, the player places his pawn on his tile on the bridge. If a player gains a tile, but all the spaces on the bridge are covered with other tiles, then the player gains the bonuses from the tile, but he will not be placing it on the bridge, thus he will not collect the bonuses from the spaces he would cover. As we said earlier, when players place tiles with these icons, they get to move their cubes in the Hanger Walls or the Cathedral tiers. This is a sideway movement. In the Hanger Walls, the cube is moved from right to left, and in the Cathedral it moves from left to right. So if I play the tile with this icon, I would move my cube here. If the cube stops in a space with a bonus, the player receives that bonus immediately. If the cube stops in a narrow space, the player gains another free move in the direction that the arrow shows. But remember that whenever a cube climbs up to the next tier, the player must spend the indicated costs on the tier. Climbing higher in the tiers will grant the players more victory points at the end of the game, and moving closer to the side will give more value to the player's blue or red bonus tokens. One last thing about the Cathedral tiers only is that as soon as the player's cube reaches the top tier, the player chooses one of these three bonus tokens that will affect his final scoring positively. After the player chooses the bonus token, he places the rest back in the space. Now let's talk about these two tracks. The first one is the technology track. As soon as the player's cube reaches a space with one of these icons, he gains a technology of the depicted level. The player picks the top three tiles from the indicated technology, keeps one of them, and returns the rest face down in the bottom of the stack. These tokens offer permanent or immediate bonuses. After this cube reaches the last space of this track, then each time the player gains another move, he gains 2 victory points instead. Last but not least, next to the track there is a score track from 1 to 8. These are victory points that will be scored at the end of the game, provided that this marker reaches at least this space. And this is because these victory points will be multiplied to the victory points reached by this marker. So if at the end of the game the marker reaches this point, then the player will gain 0 points, but if it reached this space, he would get 24 points. Please remember that you don't get these victory points as the marker goes up. However, when it reaches the last space, again, after the player gains another move, he gains 2 victory points instead. I will now explain 3 things that the player may do during his turn besides his main action. At any time during his turn, even before selecting his main action tile, a player may buy another action, either by paying 2 gold windows or 1 gold and a silver window. This extra action can be any one of the actions, and the player doesn't have to take an action tile for this extra action. Once in his turn, a player may either pay a gold or a stone and remove any 2 tiles from any one row. These tiles will move to the bottom of the corresponding stack, and the empty spaces will be immediately replenished with new tiles. Now the player may even do this before selecting the action tile for his turn, and it doesn't bind him to selecting any specific action. During their turn, players may spend 2 silver windows and make a free move with one of their cubes upwards. And provided they have enough silver windows, they can do this as many times as they like during their turn. At the end of their turns, players must discard windows to reach the limit, which is 2 windows. They can have more windows during their turns, but at the end they must discard windows to reach the limit. Next, players turn the rondel once to the right and place the token they've just used in this space here. It is now the next player's turn. If after turning the rondel the arrow moves where players normally place their action tiles, they turn the rondel once again and place the action tile here. Again, after turning the rondel, if an action tile moves past the blue zone, this 5 victory point token is placed on top of the action tile as a reminder that whichever player plays that action tile will also gain 5 victory points. As the game progresses and the rondel moves, eventually this arrow will point to this icon here. The cube will fall into a recession and will lock the rondel. Each time this happens, you move this cube one space to the left. For each player count, there's a specific line in this track that indicates when the second era should start. For a 3-player game, the line is this one indicated by this icon. After the cube passes this line, then it's the end of the first era and game proceeds with the second one. When this happens, remove all tiles from the market and from the supply out of the game. Then bring in the era 2 tiles and after you shuffle them, replenish all the empty spaces on the board. As soon as this cube falls out of this track, it's the end of the game and players proceed with final scoring. First of all plazas that were not enclosed during the game will grant the players that have a claim around that plaza the bonus depicted in the bottom part. So in this example, the blue player will gain 3 victory points. Next, players gain victory points for their positions in the technology track by multiplying the 2 factors in the 2 tracks. This player here will gain 10 victory points. Players gain victory points depending on the raw position of their cubes in the Hanger Wall and Cathedral tiers. The blue player will gain 4 victory points for this cube and 13 for this cube. The column cube position, however, determines the victory point value for the player's blue or red bonus tokens. The blue player will gain 4 victory points for each one of his blue bonus tokens and 2 victory points for his red bonus tokens. Next, players gain victory points for the number of walls around their action board. Having exactly 3 walls will grant the player 4 victory points. With 4 or 5 tiles, the player will get 10, and if the player has 6 or more tiles, he gains 18 victory points. Players score victory points for their acquired seals or their yellow tiles that might be in front of them or on the bridge. Having this tile, for example, would grant the player 2 victory points for each wall built around the action board. Finally, if the player has any remaining eggs, he gains 1, 3, 6 or 10 victory points for 1, 2, 3 or 4 eggs respectively. The game is won by the player who has accumulated the most victory points in the game. If there is a tie, the tie breaks depending on the initial turn order the players had. The player that took his first turn last will always win the game if he's tied for the most victory points. And that's the video for today, and I hope you liked it. If yes, please subscribe to my channel and don't forget to write your comments or your opinions about the game in the comments section. Until next time, have fun and play more board games.